The Texas sun was merciless that afternoon, hanging high and heavy over the dusty horizon. Heat shimmered above the rolling fields of mesquite and brittle grass, distorting the land like a restless spirit. Clara's boots were worn nearly through, the soles split so wide they chewed up stones as she walked. Every step sent up puffs of ochre dust that clung to her hemline and her throat. She had been on the road for days, half-starved and wholly desperate, when she finally caught sight of the sprawling ranch that stretched out across the valley. From a distance, the ranch looked like salvation. Fences ran in neat, endless lines across the dry fields, and the silhouettes of cattle huddled near the watering troughs. A massive barn with red flaking paint rose beside a low ranch house, its wide porch shaded by a sagging roof. Smoke drifted faintly from the chimney, a small promise of warmth and food. Clara pressed forward, clutching the bundle of cloth that hung loosely around her arm, the secret weight of it reminding her why she couldn't linger long in one place. But today she needed safety more than secrecy. Daniel McAllister was out near the paddock when he first spotted her. The rancher had the kind of build that life on hard land forged broad shoulders, weathered skin tanned by the sun, and eyes the color of a storm that never came. He leaned on the fence rail, watching his cattle settle, when movement down the dirt track caught his attention. Travelers rarely came this far. The nearest town was 20 miles off, and most who tried the walk never looked so determined to finish it. Clara staggered into the yard just as the last of her strength gave way. She steadied herself against the hitching post, chest heaving, lips dry as parchment. Her hair, once neat, was tangled and windblown, strands sticking damp against her temple. She looked half like a ghost and half like trouble. "Ma'am?" Daniel called out, his voice steady but cautious. He reached for the brim of his hat, tipping it slightly, though his other hand hovered close to the revolver on his hip. "Out here, you learned quick desperation made folks dangerous." Clara straightened, willing her legs to hold. "I need work," she said, the words catching in her throat. "I'll cook, I'll clean, I'll mend, whatever you ask. Just please, don't send me away." Daniel studied her in silence, his jaw tightening. He wasn't a man accustomed to strangers appearing at his doorstep, least of all women alone. The ranch had been quiet for years, ever since his wife passed and left the house emptier than he cared to admit. Hiring on a drifter seemed foolish. Still, there was something in the girl's eyes that stopped him. Not just desperation, but defiance. A will that hadn't yet been broken. "You travelin' alone?" He asked. Her hand went instinctively to the cloth wrapped around her forearm, pulling it closer against her body. "Yes," she said quickly, then lowered her gaze. Daniel caught the gesture but didn't press. Not yet. He knew secrets when he saw them. "Works hard out here," he said finally. "Sun'll burn you raw, and the days don't end when the light does. You still think you're fit for it?" "I don't have anywhere else to go." That was the truest thing she'd spoken, and Daniel felt it. He exhaled slowly, scanning her thin frame, the stubborn set of her chin. Against his better judgment, he nodded toward the house. "All right. You can stay a spell. Room and board in exchange for work. But if there's trouble following you, I expect to know it." Clara's lips parted in a whisper of gratitude. "Thank you, sir." He tipped his hat again, though his eyes never softened. "Don't call me sir. Daniel will do." She followed him toward the porch, her steps uneven but driven by relief. Still, she kept her arm pressed tight to her side, as though the cloth itself might betray her if it shifted. Daniel noticed, of course. Ranch life made a man observant. He said nothing, but the image stuck in his mind like a burr. Inside the house, the air was cooler, shaded from the blistering sun. The wooden floor creaked as Clara stepped over the threshold. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of light that cut through the curtains. It was a plain home, sturdy, well kept, but empty. The table had room for 6, yet only one chair showed regular use. A woman's touch lingered in the faded lace curtains, in the half-finished embroidery folded neatly by the hearth. For a moment, Clara hesitated, guilt tugging at her chest. She didn't belong here, not in this man's fragile peace. But hunger gnawed too sharply to heed conscience. Daniel gestured toward the kitchen. "There's stew left from supper. Eat first. Work comes tomorrow." Her throat ached with gratitude she didn't dare speak. As she lowered herself into the chair, her sleeve slipped slightly, and Daniel caught a flash of something dark beneath. The cloth. His gaze sharpened. Clara yanked the fabric back in place, her hands trembling. Neither spoke of it then. But the unasked question hung in the room like smoke. What was she hiding beneath that cloth? For now, Daniel let it lie. She needed food. He needed help. The answers would come soon enough. By the second day, Clara had already earned her keep. She rose before dawn, helped with breakfast, and scrubbed the cast-iron pot until it shone like black glass. Daniel had expected her to wilt in the heat or stumble through chores with the clumsiness of someone unaccustomed to ranch work. Instead, she worked steady, careful, quiet. Not one complaint crossed her lips, though he could see how the sun blistered her pale skin and how the hard ground bruised her knees. It was when she hung laundry on the line that Daniel noticed the cloth again. She had peeled off her outer coat to face the afternoon heat, leaving only her faded blouse rolled up at the sleeves. But her left arm was bound tight from wrist to elbow with a strip of coarse fabric, mottled with age and frayed at the edges. It was no bandage, not the way it was tied, and no ornament either. She tried to move as though it wasn't there, lifting wet sheets to the breeze, pegging them neatly, her motions precise. But Daniel saw the way she kept her arm turned ever so slightly inward, hiding it from view. He had seen men on the frontier guard their wounds the same way, as if to admit weakness might be an invitation for death to finish the job. He leaned on the porch rail, calling out casually, "That arm of yours hurt bad?" Clara startled, her knuckles whitening against the clothespin. She recovered quickly, lowering her gaze. "It's nothing. Just an old accident." "An accident that needs binding near tight enough to cut off the blood?" His voice was light, but his eyes narrowed. She shook her head, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine, really. Best leave it." Daniel studied her a moment longer, then spat over the railing into the dust. He wasn't a man to push questions. That didn't want answering, but the unease coiled in his gut. In his life, scars and secrets walked hand in hand, and sometimes both came with blood trailing behind. Later, when the other ranch hands returned from riding fence, the whispers began. "Who's she?" One asked. "A wiry cowboy named Mitch. Pretty thing, but odd. Keeps that arm bound like she's hiding something. Could be she's running from someone," another muttered. "A husband, maybe, or the law." Daniel silenced them with a look. He didn't tolerate gossip. But their words echoed his own suspicion. Clara's presence at the ranch was as fragile as spun glass, welcome enough for her labor, tolerated for her quietness, but that cloth threatened to shatter it all. That evening, Clara sat alone on the porch steps, watching the sky bleed into crimson dusk. Daniel joined her with 2 tin cups of water, the kind gesture offered without comment. She accepted with a nod, sipping slowly. For a while, the only sound was the low hum of cicadas and the faint bawling of cattle in the distance. Finally, Daniel spoke, his tone measured. "I've seen soldiers bind wounds after battle. Seen men hide bullet holes and infections worse than death. But I never seen anyone keep cloth tied for comfort's sake." Clara stiffened. Her fingers curled around the cup so tightly he feared it might bend. She didn't meet his eyes. "It isn't for comfort," she whispered. "Then what is it for?" "Ah." Silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. At last she shook her head, her voice trembling. "Please, don't ask me about it. I can't explain. I only beg you to let it be." There was something in the plea that unsettled Daniel more than any direct answer could have. Not defiance, not even shame. It was fear bone deep, marrow deep fear. He leaned back, stretching his legs, studying her profile in the fading light. "A ranch runs on trust," he said. "If I can't trust the folk under my roof, it don't matter how much work they put in." She turned then, her eyes wide and glistening in the dusk. "You can trust me," she said quickly. "I swear it. Just not about this, not the cloth." Daniel didn't reply. He drained his cup, rose, and left her with the crickets and the creeping dark. Inside, he set his cup down harder than he intended, the tin clattering against the table. He told himself he wouldn't press her again, that her work was worth the unanswered question. But in the stillness of the house, he knew. He had already made a promise to himself. One day, he'd see what lay beneath that cloth. And something told him he wouldn't like what he found. Out on the porch, Clara pressed her hand to the bandaged arm, shivering though the night air was still warm. The cloth pulsed faintly beneath her palm, as though alive, as though reminding her of the danger that never stopped chasing. And she whispered to the dark, "Please, just a little longer. Don't let him find out yet." Days blurred into weeks, and Clara's presence on the ranch settled into a rhythm, though never quite into comfort. She rose with the first crow of the rooster, often before Daniel himself, and slipped into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. At first the meals were plain, the kind of food a weary traveler cobbles together, beans boiled too long, bread coarse and heavy. But within a week, she had learned the kitchen secrets. By the second, she was baking biscuits so light they melted on the tongue. Daniel never said much about it, but he noticed. He noticed everything. The ranch hands, too, came to accept her. Mitch, who had been quickest to whisper suspicions, found himself begrudgingly impressed when Clara patched his torn shirt with stitches so neat they looked store-bought. Another hand, Joe, watched her handle a spooked mare with a calm firmness that steadied the animal in minutes. "Girl's got horse sense," he admitted, tipping his hat when she passed. But if the hands began to trust her, Daniel did not let his guard down so easily. He watched how she carried herself, how her smile never lingered long, how her gaze swept the horizon as though expecting someone or something to appear. Most of all, he watched the cloth. She kept it bound even in the fiercest heat, even when her blouse clung to her with sweat. Once, after a long day hauling buckets from the well, Daniel saw her duck into the barn and pull the cloth tighter around her arm, her fingers trembling as though she feared it might unravel on its own. He said nothing. Not yet. But suspicion sat heavy in his chest. Clara felt his eyes on her, and though he never spoke, his silence was louder than any accusation. Still, she found herself drawn to him. He was a man of few words, yet steady, his presence like an oak tree rooted, unyielding, a shield against the winds that tore at her own fragile life. She saw the grief etched into his features, the way he lingered over his late wife's embroidery when he thought no one was looking. The way he ate in silence at a table too large for one man. In small ways, she tried to ease that loneliness. She kept the house tidier than it had been in years, humming softly as she swept the floors. She mended curtains long left torn and placed fresh wildflowers in a chipped vase by the window. Daniel never thanked her, but she noticed how his eyes softened when he came inside to see the quiet changes. One evening, after supper, Clara found herself on the porch with him again. The sky stretched wide and endless, painted with streaks. OF violet and fading gold. Crickets sang, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. Daniel sat with his boots propped on the railing, a pipe in his hand. "You work hard," he said finally, his voice rough. Clara blinked, surprised at the words. Praise was rare from him. Hard work keeps the mind from wandering, she said softly. His gaze flicked toward her, then back to the horizon. Wandering's not always bad. Sometimes it reminds you there's more to life than cattle and dust. Clara smiled faintly, but it faltered almost at once. Wandering's dangerous. If you're not careful, it reminds you of things you'd rather forget. He studied her then, really studied her, and she shifted under his gaze. The cloth felt suddenly too tight, too heavy, as though it glowed in the twilight. You're running from something, he said at last. It wasn't a question. Her breath caught. For a moment, she thought of denying it, of fabricating some tale of a cruel husband or a ruined family. But the words tangled in her throat. She dropped her eyes instead, whispering, maybe. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of his pipe. Finally, Daniel sighed. We all got shadows trailing us, some heavier than others. But if yours ever reaches this ranch. He let the sentence die, unfinished, but the warning in it was clear. Clara nodded, her heart thudding. She wanted to promise him he would never see the shadow that hunted her, that the cloth would keep its secret sealed. But promises were fragile things, and she had broken too many already. Inside the house, the ranch hands laughed over a game of cards. The sound carried out into the night, warm and human. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, wishing she could hold on to that warmth, wishing she could belong. But her arm pulsed beneath the cloth. A dull throb that reminded her belonging was a luxury she could never afford. Daniel watched her a moment longer before turning his eyes back to the horizon. He didn't trust her, he couldn't. Yet against all logic, he found himself hoping she'd stay. And Clara, though she knew better, found herself hoping the same. The ranch always changed when the sun went down. By day, the cattle grazed lazily in the pastures. The men whistled as they worked the fence lines, and the world moved with the slow rhythm of dust and sweat. But at night, the land belonged to the creatures that prowled the dark. Coyotes yipped, owls hooted, and sometimes, far off, a mountain lion's scream curdled the stillness. It was one such night that trouble struck. The cattle had been restless all evening. Daniel noticed it first, the way they shifted uneasily, stamping hooves against the hard ground, their ears twitching toward the hills. By the time the moon climbed high, he heard the first panicked bawl. Then came the thunder of hooves, dozens of them shaking the earth. The herd was breaking. Coyotes, Daniel muttered, grabbing his rifle from the wall. He shouted toward the bunkhouse, and within moments, the ranch hands spilled out, pulling on boots, some half-dressed, all armed, with lanterns or shotguns. Clara had been washing dishes in the kitchen when the commotion began. At first, she froze, the plate slick in her hands. The noise of hooves, the shouts, the clanging of metal, it stirred memories she had tried hard to bury. But then she heard Daniel's voice, low and sharp, calling orders, and something inside her steadied. She set the plate down, wiped her hands on her apron, and ran out into the yard. The scene was chaos. Lanterns bobbed in the night like fireflies as the men chased after the herd, shouting, waving, firing into the air to scare off predators. Dust rose in clouds, glowing silver in the moonlight. Cattle bawled, colliding, scattering in panic. Without thinking, Clara ran toward the nearest strays, clapping her hands, calling softly but firmly, guiding them back toward the others. She had no rope, no weapon, but her voice carried a calmness that cut through the frenzy. A calf stumbled in the dust and she darted forward, steadying it, coaxing it upright. The men shouted in surprise. She worked like she had been born to it. Daniel caught sight of her as he swung down from his horse. For a heartbeat, he nearly ordered her back inside. But then he saw the determination in her face, the way she didn't flinch even when a coyote darted along the fence line, its eyes glinting in the lamplight. She wasn't helpless. She was fearless or foolish. He couldn't yet tell the difference. It was then he noticed something else. As Clara reached for the calf, the sleeve of her blouse slipped back, and the cloth around her arm came loose. The corner of it fell, revealing a patch of skin beneath. Daniel's breath caught. It wasn't skin at all, not the way a human arm should look. Strange, dark markings curled along her flesh like burned-in symbols, glowing faintly as if the moonlight had stirred them awake. For a moment, he thought it a trick of the dust and shadows. But no, there it was, shifting faintly, pulsing like embers under ash. Daniel felt the ground tilt beneath him. The noise of cattle and coyotes faded, replaced by the rush of blood. In his ears, he had seen scars from fire, from whips, from disease, but never anything like this. Clara gasped when she realized. She yanked the cloth back into place, her movements frantic, her face pale as bone. For a split second, her eyes met Daniel's across the chaos. Fear, raw and unguarded, flashed in them. Not fear of the coyotes, not fear of the cattle stampede, but fear of him. She turned away before he could speak, throwing herself back into the work, guiding the last of the herd toward the corral. By the time the cattle settled and the coyotes slunk back into the hills, Clara stood covered in dust, her chest heaving, the cloth wound hastily tied around her arm again. The men cheered, clapping each other on the back, laughing at their victory over the night's scare. But Daniel didn't join them. He sat rigid in his saddle, staring at her, his rifle forgotten across his lap. His hands trembled, though he tried to still them. For the first time since his wife's death, Daniel McAllister felt something that unsettled him to the core. Not grief, not anger, but a cold, crawling fear. And it wasn't of the coyotes. It was of the young woman standing in his yard, clutching the cloth on her arm as though it were the only thing keeping the world from unraveling. The night after the coyote scare, the ranch fell into an uneasy quiet. The herd had settled again, the men were back in their bunks, and the dust of chaos had drifted back to the earth. But Daniel couldn't shake what he had seen. He sat long. After the others had gone to bed, a lantern burning low beside him on the table, his pipe smoldered, untouched. In his mind's eye, he replayed the sight of the markings on Clara's arm. Dark, curling lines that had pulsed like they carried their own fire. He had tried to reason with himself. Maybe it had been the light, a trick of dust and shadow. Maybe it was nothing more than a scar, ugly and strange, but still only flesh. But he had lived too many years on this hard land to mistake his instincts. What he had seen was not natural. And it wasn't something he could ignore. By the time dawn began to streak the horizon, Daniel had made his decision. He would ask her straight, no circling, no half words. A man couldn't run a ranch with secrets under his roof. Not secrets that looked like that. He found her in the barn, as he somehow knew he would. Clara had risen before the sun again, sweeping the hay into neat piles, her hair tied back with a faded ribbon. She moved with a kind of practiced grace, each motion careful, measured, as though if she slowed for even a moment, the weight of her life would crush her. Daniel leaned against the barn door, arms crossed. He didn't speak at first. He let the silence stretch until she noticed him. When she turned, she nearly dropped the broom at the look on his face. "You were out there with the herd last night," he said, his voice low, steady. "You helped. You worked hard. But I saw it, Clara." Her hands clenched tighter around the broom handle. "Saw? What?" "The cloth." His eyes flicked to her arm, bound again in its faded strip of fabric. "I saw what's under it." "Don't lie to me." Clara's breath hitched. For a moment, she seemed to shrink, as though the barn walls were pressing in around her. "Daniel, please." He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "No, don't please me. I've given you shelter. I've given you work. My men trust you. But I won't have danger hiding under my own roof. Now you tell me what it is you're carrying, or you pack your things and leave." Her eyes filled, though not with tears, at least, not yet. They shone with something sharper, fear. Raw, consuming fear. She shook her head violently, backing a step away from him. "You don't understand. You can't understand." "If you knew, then make me understand," Daniel cut in, his voice rising for the first time. He wasn't a man who scared easy, but he felt his pulse hammering in his throat. The memory of those glowing lines gnawed at him. "Show me. Tell me the truth, Clara. What are you hiding under that cloth?" The broom clattered from her hands. She pressed her bound arm tight against her chest, her whole body trembling. Then, in a voice scarcely above a whisper, she said, "Please, don't take the cloth off." Her plea hung in the air, fragile as glass. Daniel froze. The words struck something deep inside him, but instead of softening, they hardened his resolve. He had heard beggars plead before, men beg for water, women beg for mercy. This wasn't that. This was desperation of another kind, and it made his skin crawl with unanswered questions. "You say that," he said slowly, "and all it does is make me wonder more. If you want my trust, you'll have to show me." She shook her head again, harder this time, her voice breaking. "You don't know what you're asking. You think you want to see, but once you do, there's no going back. Please, Daniel. I beg you." His jaw worked as he studied her, torn between compassion and the cold, practical instincts of survival. Finally, he reached forward. His hand brushed hers, rough fingers closing over the edge of the cloth. Clara gasped, jerking back, but he held steady. "I won't ask again." Her eyes brimmed now, shimmering in the dim barn light. She shook all over, whispering, "Don't, please don't." But Daniel's grip tightened. The rancher's hand, steady from years of roping cattle and holding reins, tugged at the fabric, pulling the first knot loose. The air in the barn grew heavy. The horses stamped nervously, their ears twitching. The lantern on the wall flickered, its flame bending as if a draft had swept through, though the doors were shut tight, and Clara closed her eyes. Tears slipping down her cheeks. The cloth began to fall away. The first knot came undone with a tug. The fabric, once wrapped snug and secret, began to sag. Clara's breath hitched sharply in the stillness of the barn. Daniel hesitated, his thumb brushing the coarse weave. For a heartbeat, doubt flickered across his face. He wasn't a cruel man. He didn't take pleasure in forcing another soul to bear what they wished to keep hidden. But he was a rancher, and ranchers knew when a rattler was coiled too close to the doorstep. He needed to know what lay beneath. His house, his men, his land, they depended on it. Clara pressed herself back against the hay-strewn wall, as though she might melt into the wood and vanish. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking, "if you take it off, everything changes." He studied her. Her eyes, wide with terror, shone in the lamplight. It wasn't the fear of a liar about to be caught, nor the shame of a scar revealed. This was something deeper, something that gnawed at her bones. His grip wavered. He could let go. He could walk away, leave her secret bound where it belonged. That choice stood in front of him as clearly as the other. Tug again, see the truth. No matter the cost, a rancher weighed choices every day: when to sell, when to cull, when to risk driving the herd across a river. Survival depended on choosing right. And as much as his heart pulled one way, his instincts demanded the other. "I can't protect what I don't understand," he said, his voice low, steady. "If danger lives under this cloth, it's already here. Better I face it now than when." "It's too late." Clara shook her head, tears slipping free. "You'll wish you hadn't. Please, Daniel, please." But his calloused fingers tightened. With one swift pull, he stripped the cloth away. The fabric unfurled like a flag surrendering. In the wind, falling limp to the ground. For the first time, the markings on Clara's arm were fully revealed. Daniel staggered back, his rifle nearly slipping from his grasp. His chest tightened as his eyes locked on the sight before him. It wasn't a wound, not like any he had ever seen. Her skin was carved or perhaps branded with lines that shimmered faintly in the lantern light. They weren't scars but symbols, curling and twisting across her flesh in patterns too precise to be chance. They seemed to shift as he looked, moving like living ink, as though they were breathing with her heartbeat. Some glowed faintly, ember red, others dark as soot. His knees almost buckled. The air thickened, heavy with a hum so low it rattled his ribs. Even the horses at their stalls grew restless, stamping, snorting, their eyes rolling white. The barn felt smaller, tighter, as though the markings themselves were bending the walls inward. Daniel's hands shook. He hadn't trembled since the war, not even when bullets snapped close enough to part his hair. But now his whole body quivered, the pipe smoke of last night's vigil still lingering in his lungs. Clara cradled her arm against her chest, her face pale with anguish. "Now you see," she whispered, her voice raw. "Now you understand why I begged you." But Daniel didn't understand, not fully. His throat worked, dry as dust. What in God's name is that?" She shook her head slowly. "Not God's, not any name you'd want to speak aloud." The words sent a chill down his spine. He wanted to demand answers, to shake them from her lips, but his tongue felt thick, useless. His eyes stayed fixed on the symbols, their glow. Hypnotic, repulsive, terrible. Finally, he tore his gaze away, clutching at the barn wall to steady himself. His whole body still shook, and he hated that he wasn't in control, that he felt small and fragile before something he couldn't reckon with. Clara bent down, fumbling to gather the cloth, wrapping it back around her arm with hurried desperation. "It has to stay covered," she whispered fiercely. "If it doesn't, they'll find me. They'll find us." Daniel looked at her, then really looked, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he felt no suspicion. Only dread. Because whatever she carried, it wasn't hers alone anymore. The moment he had pulled that cloth away, it had crossed the threshold of his ranch, and there was no undoing it. For a long moment after the cloth was stripped away, the barn held only silence, thick, suffocating silence. The restless stamping of the horses quieted, the crickets outside seemed to hush, and even the lantern's flame bent low, as if bowing before something greater. Clara's breathing was ragged. She clutched the ragged strip of fabric in trembling hands, desperate to bind her arm again, but Daniel still blocked her path. His face was pale, his chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. He couldn't tear his eyes from the thing carved into her flesh. The symbols glowed faintly now, as though the act of unwrapping them had stirred them awake. They curled across her skin like rivers of coal and fire, some forming shapes almost recognizable letters from a language older than stone, others spiraling into forms that defied sense. Daniel finally found his voice, though it cracked like dry timber. "What is it? What have you done to yourself?" Clara shook her head violently. "I didn't do this. It was done to me." The words hung heavy. Daniel's hands, still trembling, curled into fists at his sides. Who? Why? Her. Gaze darted toward the shadows of the barn, as if expecting them to come alive. When she spoke again, her voice was hoarse, the words spilling in a rush, as though each one was a burden lifted only to be replaced by the next. They called themselves the Order of the Eternal Brand, a brotherhood, a cult, whatever name you give them, it doesn't matter. I was taken, years ago. I was no one, just a girl looking for work in the city. They said they offered shelter, food, family. She laughed bitterly, a sound too sharp for someone so young. But their family had a price. Daniel's stomach turned. He wanted to look away, but couldn't. And this, Mark? They burned it into me during a ritual. Her voice faltered, her hand brushing lightly over the glowing patterns. It isn't just fire. It isn't just ink. It's a tether. To them. To whatever they worship. As long as it lives on my skin, I can never be free. The barn seemed to darken at her words. Daniel swallowed hard, every instinct in him screaming to push her away, to drive her off his land before whatever hunted her found its way here. But something deeper held him rooted in place. The fear in her eyes wasn't the fear of a predator. It was the fear of prey, running until her lungs gave out, knowing the hunters were never far behind. And if the cloth stays on? Daniel asked quietly. Her eyes met his, wide and desperate. It muffles it, contains it, just enough. They can't track me if I keep it bound. But if it's revealed, if it's uncovered too long, the mark calls to them. They'll know where. I am. They'll come. Daniel's breath caught. He glanced again at the glowing symbols, which pulsed faintly with her words as though echoing her truth. You mean to say? He struggled for the words. That brand is a beacon? Clara nodded once, tears streaking her dusty cheeks. And now you've seen it, Daniel. Now it's stirred. If they're watching, if they've been waiting, she broke off, her voice cracking. You should send me away, tonight, while there's still time. For a long moment, Daniel didn't answer. His thoughts spun like a dust devil practical, questions clashing with the dread pooling in his gut. If she spoke true, then the danger wasn't just hers anymore. It was his ranch, his men, his livelihood, his home. And yet, sending her away felt like branding her himself, casting her back to the wolves that hunted her. He looked at her thin, trembling, worn down by years of fear, and something hardened in his chest. He stepped forward, his voice rough but steady. You think sending you out alone will solve this? If they're coming, they'll find you. Cloth or no. Better you've got someone standing beside you than ridden blind into the dark. Clara's lips parted, stunned. You? You'd risk it? For me? Daniel didn't flinch. I've seen men leave folks to the coyotes. I swore I'd never be one of them. You're under my roof now. That makes you mine to protect. 4. A moment, hope flickered in her eyes. Fragile, tentative, like a candle in the wind. She clutched the cloth tighter, beginning to rewrap it around her arm with shaking fingers. The glow dimmed, retreating beneath the layers. But even as she tied the last knot, a sound reached them from the open night, the faint, distant echo of hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, drawing nearer. Clara froze, her face drained of all color. It's too late, she whispered. Daniel's jaw clenched. He reached for his rifle. The hunters were coming. The hoofbeats grew clearer with every passing second, steady, unhurried, as if whoever rode in knew there was no need to rush. The night outside the barn seemed to lean in, listening. Even the cattle in the distance had fallen quiet, their earlier unease replaced by a silence that was somehow worse. Daniel gripped his rifle tight, his knuckles whitening around the stock. His instincts screamed at him to usher Clara into the house, to bolt the doors, to rally the men. But he could feel her terror pressing against him like heat from a fire. She stood frozen in the lamplight, the cloth freshly wound around her arm, though it did little now to calm the glow pulsing beneath. Clara, he said, his voice low but firm, you need to tell me everything. No more half-truths, no more begging me not to ask. If riders are coming for you, I need to know what. We're facing. She closed her eyes, swallowing hard. You wouldn't believe me. Daniel's voice sharpened. Try me. Her shoulders slumped. For years she had borne this secret alone, but here, at the edge of being hunted down once more, she no longer had the strength to hold it back. The order marked me, she whispered, her hands trembling. At her sides. They call it a brand of binding. It ties the soul of the branded to their master body, mind, and spirit. At first, I thought it was nothing but fire and cruelty. But I soon learned it was worse. The symbols don't just scar you, they live inside you. They change you. Daniel frowned, his jaw tight. Change you how? Clara lifted her arm slightly, the cloth glowing faintly through the fabric. When uncovered, it awakens. The more it's revealed, the more it draws on me, feeds on me. It hungers, Daniel, for control, for power. And if it isn't hidden, it sends out a call, a signal to the ones who marked me. They can feel where I am, as if I were a lantern burning in the dark. Daniel's stomach twisted. So you're saying that, Brand? It's not just a mark. It's a curse. She nodded, her voice breaking. Yes, a curse that binds me to them forever, unless... Her words faltered. She dropped her gaze to the dirt floor. Daniel stepped closer, his tone sharp. Unless what? Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Unless the brand kills me. Or someone tears it away and tears me apart with it. The hoofbeats outside grew louder, a faint jingle of tack carrying on the still night air. Daniel's gut tightened. This wasn't idle talk anymore. Whatever hunted her, it was close. Why you? He asked. Why would they brand a girl like you? Clara's face hardened, her trembling replaced with something like shame. Because I was young, I was alone. And I was foolish enough to believe their promises. They told me I could belong, that I'd never go hungry again, never sleep cold. Under the stars, all I had to do was kneel. Her lips trembled, so I did. And by the time I realized what they were, it was too late. They carved me open with fire, and they bound me to their master, to him. Daniel swallowed. And who is he? Her eyes flicked up to his, and the look there chilled him more than the sound of hoofbeats ever could. They call him the Keeper of Ashes, a man once, now something more. Or less, her voice shook. I don't know what he is anymore, but I know he isn't human. And the mark ties me to him. If they come for me, Daniel, it isn't just riders. It's his will, his hunger. The hoofbeats stopped. Both froze, listening. Somewhere just beyond the barn doors, a horse snorted softly. Leather creaked. A rider had dismounted. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle, his pulse thundering in his ears. How many come when the mark calls? Clara's lips trembled. Sometimes a few. Sometimes dozens. Enough to drag me back. Enough to kill anyone who stands in their way. Daniel felt a cold sweat beat his brow. He had fought raiders, wild animals, even men gone mad with drink and violence, but never anything like this. And yet, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sending Clara away would not save his ranch. The danger was already here. He leveled his rifle at the door, his voice like iron. Then let him come. Clara stared at him, shocked. You don't understand. You can't fight them. His jaw tightened, his storm-gray eyes hard as steel. I've fought men with less soul than beasts. I've buried friends with more scars than skin. You think I'll stand aside now? No, Clara, you're here. You're under my roof. That means you ain't facing this alone. Tears welled in her eyes, not just of fear, but of something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Outside, the barn door creaked. A shadow shifted across the lantern light. The first of the hunters had arrived. The barn door shuddered as if a hand had brushed against it from the outside. Not a knock-dash, no, that would have been too polite. This was deliberate, a caress meant to remind them the hunters could touch what they pleased, whenever they pleased. Clara pressed herself back against the stall gate, her bound arm clutched tight to her chest. Her face was ashen, her lips moving in a silent prayer that never finished. Daniel kept his rifle leveled at the door. His heart hammered, but his voice came out calm, steady, the same tone he used to steady spook cattle or green ranch hands. How many you reckon? Clara shook her head. I don't know. Sometimes it's one, a scout. Sometimes. Her voice trailed off, and the silence that followed was louder than any number she could have spoken. Daniel exhaled slow, forcing his hands to stop shaking. He had fought men before, desperate drifters, rustlers, outlaws. They bled when you cut them. They fell when you shot them. Whatever stepped out of the dark tonight, he had to believe it could bleed too. But it wasn't just his life on the line anymore. It was hers. It was the ranch. It was his men sleeping not 50 yards away in the bunkhouse. He glanced at her. She looked so small in the shadows, like a girl lost in a storm, but there was steel in her eyes too. Steel tempered by years of running. Clara, he said, his voice lower now, you need to hear me. I don't scare easy, but I ain't blind. Whatever this is, whatever's hunting you, it's worse than anything I've seen. You're giving me a choice right now, whether you mean to or not. I can turn you out, send you ridden into the dark, hope they follow you and not me. Or, he paused, jaw tightening, or I can stand my ground and fight with you. Her eyes filled, glistening in the lantern glow. Daniel, if you choose? Me, you're choosing death. They won't stop. Not till they have me back. He almost laughed, a bitter sound in his chest. Then it's no choice at all. What do you mean? She whispered. Daniel lowered his rifle just long enough to rest a hand on her shoulder. It was rough, calloused, steady. I buried my wife 3 winters back. This house has been quiet since. Too quiet. I've been living like I'm already in the ground. But then you came. His eyes softened, storm gray but lit with a fire she hadn't seen before. Maybe you brought trouble with you, sure. But you also brought life back into these walls. And I'll be damned if I let anyone or anything take that away. Clara's throat worked as she tried to swallow her tears. You don't know what they'll do to you. Maybe not. But I know this much. I won't be the man who turned a girl over to monsters just to save his own skin. He raised his rifle again, nodding toward the door. So if they're coming, they'll have to go through me first. The barn door creaked again. This time, the latch rattled. Clara's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve. If you stand with me, there's no turning back. You'll be marked too, not with the brand, but with blood. Once they know your face, your land, they won't stop hunting you either. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Then let him try. For a moment, she simply stared at him, stunned. For years she had carried the mark alone, bearing its curse, like a coffin strapped to her soul. And here stood a man who knew the cost and chose to carry it anyway. Her knees nearly buckled with the weight of it, not the curse, but the hope. The door groaned, hinges straining. A cold draft slithered into the barn, chilling the lantern flame. The horses shied, whinnying, their fear raw and sharp. Daniel chambered around with a sharp metallic snap. Stay behind me. Clara wrapped the cloth tighter around her arm, whispering a shaky vow to herself. If he died tonight, it would not be for nothing. She would not let the brand take him too. The latch lifted. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel squared his shoulders, the rifle steady in his grip. In his chest his heart thundered, but his voice was clear as iron when he muttered, almost to himself, "My decision's made." The barn door began to swing open. The barn door opened with a groan that seemed to split the night. Cold air swept in, dragging with it the scent of ash and iron. The lantern flame shivered, throwing long, jagged shadows against the wooden walls. A figure stood in the doorway. At first glance, it was only a man, tall, cloaked in dust and leather, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low to hide his face. But there was something wrong about the way he moved, too still, too deliberate. When he finally stepped forward, the lantern's glow caught him, and Daniel's gut twisted. The rider's eyes burned. faintly red, as if embers smoldered where pupils should be. His skin was pale and dry, like parchment left too long in the sun. Around his neck hung a strip of cloth, not unlike Clara's but blackened, charred at the edges, as if it had been soaked in fire. Clara gasped, clutching Daniel's sleeve. A seeker. The figure's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. His voice, when it came, was hollow like wind rushing through a crypt. "Little lamb," he said, his gaze locking onto Clara, "you've wandered far. But the brand remembers. The keeper remembers." Daniel raised his rifle, planting his boots firm in the dirt. "She ain't going anywhere with you." The seeker's ember eyes flicked to him, as though noticing him for the first time. Amusement glimmered faintly. "A rancher. A man of dust and toil. You would stand in the way of eternity?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "I'd stand in the way of hell itself if it came knocking at my door." The seeker chuckled, low and dry like crackling coals. He stepped further into the barn, the horses screaming and stamping at his presence. The glow from Clara's bound arm pulsed harder, straining against the fabric, answering him like a beacon. Clara trembled, tears welling in her eyes. "Daniel, we have to run. We can't fight him." But Daniel didn't move. His rifle stayed steady, trained on the seeker's chest. He had faced rustlers, drunks with knives, even a mountain lion that stalked his herd. Fear was not new to him. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that clawed at your soul, whispering you were already beaten. Still, he refused to bend. The seeker tilted his head, watching him with an almost curious patience. "You are brave, rancher. Foolish, but brave. That will make your fall all the sweeter." Clara's grip tightened on Daniel's sleeve. Her voice was frantic now. "He's not here to take me, Daniel. He's here to mark the land, to make it theirs." Daniel stiffened. "What do you mean?" Her eyes glistened with despair. "Wherever a seeker walks, the keeper's shadow follows. This ranch your home, it won't survive him. The earth will wither, the cattle will sicken, the men will lose themselves. It starts tonight." Daniel's gut turned cold. The seeker wasn't just after Clara, he was after everything she had touched. Everything Daniel had built. The seeker lifted a pale hand, and for the first time, Daniel saw the brand burned into his palm, a mirror of Clara's, but complete, unbound, glowing like molten iron. The sight made Clara cry out, her knees buckling. The marks beneath her cloth flared in response, burning her from within. "Do you see?" The seeker whispered, his voice spreading like smoke through the barn. "The brand binds us. She belongs to the keeper, and soon, rancher, so will you." Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. His whole body screamed to fire, to drive a bullet through the monster's chest. But something in the seeker's calm, ember-lit eyes stopped him. This was no ordinary fight. One shot might not even scratch him, and yet doing nothing was worse. He steadied his breath. If tonight was the beginning of a war, then he would draw the first line. "You want her?" Daniel growled, his voice low and cold. "Then you'll have to go through me. And you'll find I don't break easy." The seeker smiled, slow, cruel. "Inevitable, so be it." The lantern flickered violently, nearly snuffing out. Shadows twisted, reaching like claws along the barn walls. The air grew thick with the stench of ash. Clara buried her face against Daniel's arm, whispering through her tears. "This is only the beginning." Daniel's jaw set like stone. Rifle in hand, heart burning with defiance, he faced the seeker. Head on, whatever storm was coming, he had made his choice, and in that moment, Daniel knew the ranch would never be the same again.